Hello, everyone. Before I proceed, I just want to remind you all that you may switch the interpretation toggle, which looks like a small globe and is situated toward the bottom of the screen to hear the Arabic translation live. يرجى من جميع المستمعين الكرام اختيار اللغة العربية في قائمة الترجمة الفورية في أسفل الشاشة لسماع الترجمة في اللغة العربية. Welcome everyone to panel 13 on coping with the pandemic, student perceptions and learning mechanisms. My name is Janaan Farhat, and I am the co-organizer and member of the GCES Secretariat, alongside my colleague Max Eckert at the Sheikh Saud bin Saqr Al Qasimi Foundation for Policy Research. We have a few presenters joining us today. First off, we have Ms. Rashita Puthiya, a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, who currently works as a full-time lecturer in accounting and finance at Middlesex University, Dubai. She will be presenting her research in the presentation, A Framework for Selecting and Assessing E-Learning Tools. Next off, we have Dr. Olga Samsonova, a lecturer at the Higher Colleges of Technology in Abu Dhabi, who holds a PhD in Learning, Instruction and Innovation from Walden University in the United States. Dr. Olga will be presenting her work in the presentation, Higher Education Students' Experiences of Distance Learning During COVID-19. And last but not least, of course, we have Mr. Philip Anderson and Dr. Dawn England. Mr. Anderson is a lecturer in education and early childhood studies at Middlesex University, Dubai. Similarly, Dr. England is a senior lecturer and campus program coordinator for the Education and Early Childhood Studies Department at Middlesex University, Dubai. She holds a PhD from Arizona State University in Family and Human Development. Mr. Anderson will be predominantly presenting their presentation on the educational impact of UAE's response the educational impact of the UAE's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, student approaches to studying, and perceptions of the distance learning environment. So let us proceed now to the presentations. Ms. Rashita, the floor is yours. Please feel free to share your screen. And I'd just like to remind everyone that is watching us live now that the entire panel will be conducted in English. So if you want to watch everything in Arabic, please feel free to switch the toggle. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good day to one and all. I present to you a framework for selecting and assessing e-learning tools. The structure of the presentation will be as follows. I begin with the problem statement, review few literature, propose my framework, and then explain as to why I think this framework is doable and will add value to the educator's teaching practice. Before I go into my hardcore of the presentation, a few assumptions. We as educators are not tool authors, and I presume that we tend to use the tools which is available in a plug and play mode. Teaching is currently, and I presume will be facilitated by a human instructor. Online teaching includes synchronous and asynchronous sessions. Now, e-learning tools could be applicable in an online space or in a physical classroom or in any other mode that we see learning to happen in future. When I tell you to give me an example of an e-learning tool, possibly the first one that would just come out of your mind would be a quizzing app. So what is an e-learning tool? Any technology that mediates interaction between learner and the educational content is an e-learning tool. I hope all of you have Googled quizzing app. You should be getting at least 35 different applications, some of them which are free, some which are paid. We as educators are subject domain experts and not necessarily fluent in selecting and evaluating these tools. Now, these e-learning tools is not something which just happened because of the sudden shift to online teaching due to COVID-19 pandemic. It was there, but many of us possibly started actively using it due to the online teaching mode. Well, Some of us pick the tool like throwing darts. The World Economic Forum report says that if learning has to be meaningful, if you need to achieve the intended learning outcomes in an online space, then the educators have to use a range of collaborative tools that facilitates participation, inclusion, gamification, and so on. Now let's move to literature. There's a vast array of literature which is available, and I present to you only 3 frameworks which helps me to build my model. In 2003, Houghton and Houghton published what's known as a consumer's guide to e-learning and tools and technologies. The very first sentence of this book is, technology does not make e-learning. And for selecting e-learning tools for the teachers, they recommended that the selection was not per se what is mentioned in the book, but they suggested to make a whole list of tools available to you, meaning the educators, and fit the tool you are familiar. That's very important. You're familiar into the framework. Another interesting model in 2020 was the backward design and e-learning tools. This model said to the educators, focus on the constructive alignment. That's what's your intended learning outcome. Backward design. So then focus on how are you going to assess the intended learning outcomes, and then design your teaching and learning activities. So at each step, a tutor shall ask what is the overarching question, and then think about the e-learning application. Again, something interesting in this framework, the very first question that was asked on an e-learning application is an e-learning tool essential to achieve the desired outcome? In 2012, Dr. Ruben Putendura, he designed what is known as an SAMR framework, which is a framework that helps to classify an e-learning tool. So traditionally, for example, if you were having a test in a pen and paper mode, and if you're using a quizzing app, that becomes a substitution. If you're using a tool that provides a functional improvement, then you can classify it as an augmentation. If technology permits you to do a significant redesign of your task, that's modification. And finally, let us say you're able to create some new task which is inconceivable, and I cannot think of an example, maybe something like a virtual reality, and that's known as a transformation. A lot of educators just try to map the tools onto the Samr framework, SAMR framework. And the biggest criticism of this framework is it is excessively focused on the product, meaning the use of technology, rather than the learning process. Mere using of this framework was found to ignore the learning context. What are the learner's needs? What are the instructor's needs? And this framework was argued to be very deterministic and linear, when learning is to be seen as a very continuous process. So in words of Winkelmann, these mapping tools brought in new insights, but it does not replace learning theories and pedagogies. Based on my review of literature and my experience, I now propose to you a step-by-step guidance on selecting an e-learning tool. The entire framework is designed from an instructor perspective. We believe that a tutor is the more knowledgeable other. Literature says that if a tutor is comfortable using the tool, then they transfer that comfort to the learners. So number one, the design, the framework is for the tutors. Now, what precedes selection of the tool? Definitely it's your teaching strategy. So look into constructive alignment. If you are teaching on an online space, online mode, then you should consider the online teaching theories. Are the students participating? Are the students engaging? Do you have to build a sense of belongingness, a sense of community, so on and so forth? There are a host of online teaching theories available. So possibly traditionally you did not consider that. That becomes new items in your constructive alignment. Once you fix your teaching strategy with new considerations, look into your lesson planning. In fact, in 2016, an author did a review of 29 different pedagogical planners. I'm not going into it. So when you select a tool, see where it fits in the lesson planning. If you are teaching on an online mode, remember that what your eyes and ears could do in a traditional classroom, you possibly need to use a tool to maybe replace some element of that. Are the students following you? So there is a need for new e-learning tools to be incorporated into your lesson plan. Finally, which tool? This is where the mapping process begins. Rather than the questions which the original SAMR framework has used, I have slightly adapted and given a guidance matrix. I presume that all educators have got a well-designed teaching and learning process. So if you are picking an e-learning tool, you start like you throw darts. So that's the substitution. If the tools, and once you start using the tools, have you looked into the new teaching theories, online specific considerations? Is the tool allowing you to augment the context? Then, well, you could put the tool under augmentation. If the e-learning tool permits you to revamp your teaching strategies, revamp your assessments, then yes, you could classify it under modification. And finally, if the tool permits you to revise your learning outcomes in line with the changing digital landscape, or maybe provide a superior learning experience, well, that comes under redefinition. You would be thinking, so what is a big deal about it? Well, based on my last 1 year experimentation, discussion with my colleagues, informal feedback, those who have used the framework believes that this mapping process facilitates a continuous improvement. At each stage, we recommend that you catalog the list of tools. What fits for me may not fit for you. You reflect, you share your best practice, and finally, you should be able to create a customized toolkit. Remember, technology is moving much faster than the pace at which we change our education practice.
Ms. Rashita, I just wanted to remind you, you have about 4 minutes left.
Thank you, Ms. Janaan.
No problem.
All right, so that's the entire process. While some people see this Samr framework as a hierarchy, some see it as a spectrum. What I recommend is to see it like a maturity ladder for continuous improvement. Next question, do you have to evaluate these tools? Well, the literature and my experience says, do not keep adding layers of work. What is our key objective? It is, have the students achieved the intended learning outcomes? So there is no separate metrics but rather the same metrics that you use to evaluate your intended learning outcomes will help you to evaluate where you stand in your teaching and learning practice. To conclude, what is the steps moving forward? Well, myself, along with the education department in my university, plan to conduct a kind of a teacher's training event, share the framework with colleagues in different disciplines. As a result of this training process, we presume to create an awareness about the technology adoption and change perception. We plan to create a community of practice of the users, discuss, document their experiences, and then see how this framework has helped them to change with times and adapt to technology. With that in mind, thank you very much, and looking forward to your questions and suggestions for improvement.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Rashita, for your extremely interesting presentation on e-learning tools and how we can use them to ensure that students have achieved the intended learning objective. Of course, it's really important now, more so than ever, of course, because everyone is using the internet to facilitate learning, and distance learning has become our new reality. So I won't ask you any questions now, but I can already see a few interesting ones in the Q&A box. So let's put a hold on that. And I'd like to yield the floor to our next presenter, Dr. Samsonova. The floor is yours, Dr. Samsonova.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Samsonova. Like I've been presented, today I want to present my research in higher education student experience with distance learning during COVID. This research has the following outline. First, I will introduce my research, state my 3 research questions, talk about methodology, findings, and make some conclusions and recommendations. So as we all know, as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, all the schools, colleges, universities in United Arab Emirates were closed, and we've been moved to distance learning mode. And my study was aiming to find out how higher educational students were reacting on this distance learning mode. So my research questions were question number 1, to what extent was higher colleges of technology students prepared for distance learning? How do students feel about their distance learning experience, and what are the student reflection on distance learning tools? Like I said, I was studying in higher college of technology. During my summer class, I picked 18 female undergraduate students. It's Abu Dhabi Federal College. They'd been enrolled in educational summer class. And the study had mixed methodology approach. I was collecting student reflections. They've been asked to react on distance learning during each week of study. It was 4 weeks summer class. Each week I asked them, please to reflect, make a journal, do any reflection and anything happen in your class, anything related to your colleagues, related to your teacher discussion, group work, your assessment, any learning tool that happened to be used in the class, as well as I've been creating questionnaires that contain qualitative and quantitative questions, and those questionnaires were analyzed as well. The data analysis was made using grounded theory approach, and those emergent categories were analyzed, as well as Excel spreadsheet were used for quantitative data analysis. So as you remember, my first question was how higher colleges of technology was prepared for distance learning. Based on my students, my study participants' answers was the findings were that my students think that college was prepared for distance learning, as well as students, they felt prepared as well. when I asked them how did they feel during distance learning, being they supported by administration, being they supported by the faculty. As you see, most of the students agreed on the fact that they were feeling supported by administrative staff of higher colleges of technology, as well as faculty staff of higher colleges of technology. My second question was, what are the students' feelings of distance learning? As you see, I show you the categories that appear during my analysis. And if you see on the left side, I listed all the category and subcategories with the students' responses. On the right side, I cited research, the recent research that supported my findings based on these categories. So for my second research question, what are the students' responses onto the distance learning experience? I have two main categories. They were talking about advantages of distance learning and disadvantages of distance learning. So for the advantages, my students said it's good not to be late to the class anymore, that distance learning helped them not to be late. It's easy to access. And some of my students says that it's very good to be at home and stay with the family and take care of the kids and the rest of the family during the studying. One of the advantages was named communication with instructors. The study participants state that it's easy to access, to communicate, and there are different modalities of communication with the teacher. As well as one of the advantage was named lesson recording. Especially it was good for some of the special education students who can have an ability to record the lesson, play this lesson over and over, make the Zoom mode and study this lesson, like I said, over and over, as well as time saving component was mentioned as well. For the disadvantages, I want to mention one of the things very interesting. Like I said previously, some of the study participants said the family staying at home was advantage for them. However, some of the students mentioned that family staying at home was disadvantage for them. They stated that it was hard for them to focus on the work when they had family in their house. So like I said, for some of them, it was advantage. For some of the students were disadvantage. The rest disadvantages were listed as technical problems. Like I said, there is a plenty of research saying this is a problem all over the world. Technical problems, this internet connection, being focused. Like I said, some of the students were able to focus and some of the participants were not able. Disadvantages of understanding materials, great, was a concern. The main concern was students were not sure if during the distance learning mode, since it was new for them, they were going to have a good grade because there was a lot of questions, a lot of new things that happened during the class. The next disadvantage was listed lack of resources, lack of physical content, and lack of hands-on activities. Like I said, those students were educational students and a lot of materials needed for them to practice and use in their future practice. So lack of resources, physical contact with teacher and their team members and their friends, and lack of hands-on activities were disadvantages. The next question, the last one, I was focusing on asking question about what are my students' reflection on distance learning tool that being used during teaching. So like I said, again, on the right side, there is research, and I was trying my best to list the most recent research that was confirming my findings. So the first tool, the students were reacting, it's assessment description, and they were saying it's very important for the online assessment description to be very organized and clear. And the next one, a very interesting finding, my students were begging and asking me to post assessment examples. So they said it was very good and very useful for them to see previous semester assessments to know how does it look and what they have to focus on. And I think that using assessment examples and online learning, it's an area that needs to be further researched. And some of my colleagues, some of my manager will not agree. We have to post those examples on a Blackboard. So I think this is the thing that we have. This is the topic that needs to be researched further. The next category appeared Blackboard Setup. Students were saying it's important for Blackboard to be very organized and clear, as well as assessment description. And as you see, there is a research on the right side that say it's important supporting my findings. And the next, communication with the instructor. So for students, for the responders, it was important that instructor was timely answer all the questions. So, and they like the fact that I responded quickly. I was using different modality of a response, and they were saying that it was good for them to collaborate, to talk to me over the collaborative ultra, over WhatsApp, over the phone, and they feel comfortable that all the responses were timely and different modalities were used. The next tool that students replied on using Collaborate Ultra during online learning. So students were talking about the positivity of Collaborating Ultra in terms of using it for group work. They were saying it's easy to use. It's useful for content display and communications. Students, the study participants like the fact that they can open the microphone anytime I was explaining the lesson and ask a question, as well as they were able to communicate with their friends using Collaborate Ultra for the group work as well. However, as we see here, there was a problem with internet as well. The next tool that a student reacted on, it's a Nearpod. Let me say it. Those tools were not used during every single lesson. And talking about the previous presenter, all the lessons mentioned the previous presenter. All the lessons were conducted as a synchronous lesson. All the lessons were during the Zooming, Collaborate Ultra, so there was no asynchronous lesson. So Nearpod was used for some of the lesson, and students were saying that it's good for lesson display, it's good for the lesson archive, it's good for taking attendance. So Nearpod was used for tracking attendance. It's very good in terms of fact that if students are Zooming with you or use Collaborate Ultra, it's hard to track if they're actually focusing on the lesson. When Nearpod is being used, the Nearpod gives you kind of report saying how many minutes they were focused, how many times they answered the question, did they participate or they didn't participate, as well as the student participants saying that it's good for lesson note taking. But some of the students didn't like Nearpod. They said Collaborate Ultra was enough for them. So it was the choice of preference. The next tool that
Dr. Olga, just wanted to remind you that you have about 4 minutes left.
Yep, thank you so much. The next tool was Padlet, and students were talking about using Padlet as a collaboration tool, as well as classroom discussion was mentioned in the reflections. Some of the students liked collaboration through classroom discussion. However, some of them didn't like it. Look, the next category, group work. For some of the participants, group work during online learning was helpful. For some of them, it was not helpful and was not supported. For some of the students, collaboration and discussion and group work was good for sharing ideas, to work with friends and grow in their mind. However, some of the students stated that group work that happened during distance learning didn't support their learning because they prefer to work alone, or they noticed some of the students didn't work hard as the rest of the students. And the last category that appeared during the analysis was media resources, such as videos and PowerPoint. Most of the participants say it was helpful for them to use these resources. And they were saying some of the students prefer PowerPoints, some of them like videos. And the last remarks and last word that I want to say, as we've all seen, multiple categories appear from the study, such as advantages, disadvantages of distance learning, Blackboard setup, assessment description, classroom discussions, group work, PowerPoint, media resources. And I think this is the most important for future researchers to look at those categories and make a further research in order for distance learning happen successfully. Thank you so much. This is my email. If you have any questions, please use it. And I want to say that my presentation will publish on ResearchGate. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Olga, for that very insightful presentation on students' perceptions of distance learning and the different advantages and disadvantages that you spoke of. Also, spoke to so many of us who have who are either educators and are involved in the process of actually engaging students and trying to gauge their reactions to distance learning, as well as, of course, those of us who are students and are trying to complete, for example, our PhDs or our master's degrees or bachelor's degrees during this time. So that was really interesting, and I can see you also have a few questions. So we'll also put those on hold for now, and I will yield the floor now to our last presenter for this session before we dive into the live Q&A. Mr. Anderson, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Salam alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, GCES, for inviting me here today, and myself and Dr. Dawn. Dr. Samsonova, this is quite similar. It's good to have lots of different action research around the UAE, and I was really interested by your results, so hopefully you'll be interested in mine. So mine is very similar. It is about environments for learning, and it is the undergraduate responses following the closure of campuses during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the first thing I want you to do is actually I want you to all kind of respond to something in the chat. I'm going to present 6 pictures on the board, A, B, C, D, E, F, and I want you to respond in the chat. I'll give about a minute and a half. Which one reminds you most of lockdown last year, basically? So is it A, baking bread? Is it B, or banana bread? I did a very bad banana bread. Anyway, is it B? This is Joe Wicks, but it could be anybody. It could be any kind of fitness YouTube person that kept you sane, jumping around in your apartment or villa. Is it your pets? That is my dog barking as my wife walks into the room. So is that your pets that kept you sane in lockdown? Did you watch a lot of Netflix? Is it the initials of your students that have their cameras off? Do we all have the same issue that I do? Or is it wearing loungewear? I Google image work from home loungewear, and I found this shirt / pajama outfit. I swear that I'm not wearing that right now, but it is available in some online shops. So if you go into the chat and make sure that you chat to all the panelists and everybody, otherwise Max will be getting all of your answers. Yes, so just what reminds you of lockdown last year? Okay, multiple answers are accepted. Okay, D and F. Yeah, a lot of Netflix going on. Good to see that Dawn was baking. Some people baking. Yeah, I made some bread in my slow cooker and it didn't go down very well at all. Max has been baking. Good. We've all had a bit of a go at it. I mean, the main reason for me doing this, as we see more of these come in, is that in the UAE at the moment we do have restrictions in place, but last year was very, very different. And as I talk about all of the student reactions to what happened last year, and when we got thrust into this situation, it is a very different situation as to how we are in now. And this is what the presentation is going to touch on quite a bit. Let me just move to the next one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss all the previous literature, introduce some of the models that underpin the research that myself and Dr. Dawn did, outline the aims of the research, why it was conducted, show you the findings, and then discuss the implications in the research for the future. I think, yeah, that's it. We won't do the end bit because I'll get told off by Janaan. There'll be too much. There will be not enough time. Okay. So the context, as we all know, all of the universities and schools closed last year, March the 8th. Teaching and learning moved online with video conferencing software. This focuses on the students that I teach. I taught all of the students, the undergrad students in early childhood and education at Middlesex last year. So I had access to all of the data for all of them when I was gaining their perspectives. And obviously it's to see how they responded to this sudden change of environment. So my first problem, it being an action research project and you have to identify a problem, is the subjective feeling of belongingness. And some of my research into this, the school in Edge Hill University, they found this project found that 37% of students consider dropping out over the academic year. They think about it, does cross their mind. As we go into e-learning, that percentage goes up. So actually the dropout levels in e-learning are quite high, a lot higher than in the physical classroom. So students need to feel like they belong to the university and feel this sense of connectedness to the institution. Studies that look into this, looking into building community or looking into belongingness, suggest that we should build communities. We should have, I run the events at the university, we should have film club, book club, those kinds of things in order to make all these students who are sat at home actually feel like they can interact with anyone at any time. It's, yeah, as I said before, it's ensuring that students feel they connect to the university. Just as a caveat, this was this time last year. So as of the 8th of March last year, we were 20 minutes into the term. So they had these opportunities to connect with each other anyway. They all knew each other. It was just for these last 5 weeks, well, 4 to 5 weeks, that we were locked down for the end of term. The other problem is the change in environment. So we've gone to this physical environment of the university to the online environment, completely new to pretty much all of my students. So I looked at this model by a researcher called Entwistle and their colleagues about environments in higher education. So they hypothesized that the perception of the learning environment, how they see the learning environment, affects the students' learning more than the actual teaching methods themselves. So how they see the environment around them. And this really interested me. So what they did, Entwistle et al., they did a questionnaire at the beginning and asked them what their perceptions of the environment were and what they anticipated about the environment going forward. And then they gave one at the end of the course. So I adapted this for my research. I gave a questionnaire at the beginning and a questionnaire at the end. And they found relationships between perceptions and the approach to studying. The model looks a little bit like this. I'm giving you a whistle-stop tour through this research, so I'll just show you some of the most important things. You've got the approaches to learning and studying, you've got their prior experiences, and then the quality of learning received. I adapted the model a little bit just to make sure that I talked about online learning and the formats of online lessons that I give. I gave didactic lectures, I gave some flipped learning lectures, I let them present some of their assessments. So different formats of online learning, and I wanted to see what worked in this new environment. So when Entwistle's survey is given out, it assesses the student approaches to learning, and it breaks it down into 3 different approaches. They can either have a surface approach, where they take things at face value. This is a sample from the questionnaire. They measure a deep approach, where they like to look a little bit further, a little bit deeper into the learning and try and improve their skills. And they look at strategic approaches. So this questionnaire measured their expectations and also assessed what approach to learning that they had and whether this approach to learning changed before the online learning and then after the online learning when the period of study was over. The other one, I'm going to quickly go through this, was the technology adoption model. I wanted to look at this alongside this model of environments for learning just to see what they were going to, whether they would actually adopt e-learning in the future. So Panus adapted the technology adoption model, looking at what people would adopt in the future. A lot of arrows and lines there. I'm mainly interested in the top bit. Their self-efficacy, how easy they find it and how much they enjoy it and how that affects whether they intend to use it or not. So, and they also took into account situational variables such as circumstance, experience, and training. And Dr. Samsonova touched on it. Connectivity is a situational variable. People being locked down and loads of people using the internet at the same time and it infecting their connectivity. It's a situational variable. And what I liked about this model is it took it into account. So this I used alongside because I wanted to measure whether they found it easy and whether they enjoyed it. Because our department, come September, we're in this blended learning environment or this e-learning environment, we want to know what how they find it so that we can adapt our materials accordingly. So just going through how the research is. It's an action research study. Basically, through identifying all of these interventions, we can make our curriculum better, and just gaining insight into our students can make everything better and hopefully improve the learning in the pandemic. My 4 research questions are: what expectations did students have prior to the online period? What format of lesson, so the traditional, the flipped learning, the presentation, what format did they perceive to be the most useful? And obviously perceived ease of use effects, whether they do it, whether they enjoy it. Will the shift in learning affect the student approaches? And did the lesson delivery, so the way I delivered the lesson, affect the experience of the online learning environment? I can see my time is going, so I'm going to just flip through this. So the way in which I did it, we had the surveys, and on top of that, I did focus groups every week with my classes. So I had a qualitative mixed method study, qualitative and quantitative data. And I analyzed the quantitative on a SPSS, did correlations and frequency data, and then thematically analyzed the focus group data using NVivo 12. So the results were, so first of all, research question 1. Students were reported as mainly deep and strategic learners, and they expected online learning to be useful for their career and academics. So they basically saw the use of this for the future. They thought that online learning is going to happen, or online environments are going to happen, whatever job they have. So they saw this to be useful for that, and there's a quote from it. So building your skills in online presenting, you're going to render people's interest. So keep building these skills and they'll be useful in the future. Interestingly for me, they preferred live lectures. So instead of I was going flip learning, yeah, let's do this, let's do these innovative types of learning, but they wanted me to be talking, the sage on the stage, they wanted me to be talking at them. They liked it because they could interrupt it. And also it was linked to these feelings of belongingness, because it was the format of lesson which closely resembled the classroom. Yeah. All of the approaches to learning, so the surface, the strategic, and the deep, showed significant correlations. And those who reported high strategic approaches to learning, they also experienced positive experiences across all 5 scales. So they liked the fact that they could clear their doubts instantly with me. They'll be in the classroom and they can do that, or they can email me and they can clear their doubts. The final research question on the demands and the skills: students cope well with the demands of the learning environment. They learned many independent skills, but also found them difficult. I found that very interesting. They said, oh, it's very, very hard to be independent, but they learned how to be independent. So they'll complain about these things, but they actually see the value of them at the same time. And this is a quote about Light. So GoToMeeting was the platform that we used, a bit like Zoom. It's the closest thing that we have to being back in the classroom. So the theme here is this subjective feeling of belongingness to the institution, and how this particular element of the online environment got to replicate it. There were some outliers. There were people that didn't enjoy it.
Mr. Anderson, just want to remind you have about 3 to 4 minutes left.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem.
We had some individuals reporting negative experiences, very few, but some, and it was worth highlighting these. They found it difficult to follow presentations, and they felt like it was talking to themselves when they were giving presentations. I've never had that feeling before. Being interactive, being very hard to communicate with each other like they do in class, so they miss their peer interaction. And it's draining, and there's no structure and there's no routine. So people lost that routine. They were thrust into this environment, this new learning environment, without much notice, and it was very, very difficult for some of them. So despite the fact that there was quite a lot of positive data, I think when looking at our students and looking at the research into people who have these feelings of wanting to drop out, you should really zoom in on these and focus on these and intervene with these students as well. Summary of findings, is that what it says? Students took a predominantly deep and strategic approach, and they had a positive perception of the environment. I thought of two different reasons they might have preferred the live lectures. This could be this subjective feeling of belongingness, or it could be a lack of time to embed this flip model. And those of you who've researched flip learning know that one of the pitfalls of it is it's a two-way street. It's a learning process for the teacher and for the student. So maybe 4 weeks probably wasn't enough time. Research says that foster a sense of community and intervene to assist those who are unhappy are outliers. And the situational context, like the connectivity, people teaching in the other room, I also had that, Dr. Olga. These kinds of things, these things need to be taken into account and need to be accounted for when you're doing the blended learning in the future. The last thing, so conclusions and limitations. The e-learning early childhood studies students favor exploring concepts through collaboration and interaction. That's what strategic and deep learning is. Therefore, we could still use flipped learning. I haven't given up on it, and we do quite a lot of flipped and asynchronous learning this year in the university, and actually they really enjoy it. I think so. We should use technology that simulates the live environment. So with Teams, which we use, you've got the hands up on here. Those kinds of things are awesome, and those things make students feel like they belong in the classroom. Continue to build online communities and plan support for the digital divide as well. These people who have connectivity issues, and that's just one issue to do with it. Limitations, it was self-reported data. So the observer effect, they might have been reporting just answers just to try and please me. Focus group dynamics. There was some domination that happens, especially in the online focus groups. And yeah, general self-reporting of student approaches, there can be some flaws in that sometimes. And then the last one is quite a small sample, so it can't really be replicated. However, as a piece of action research, it was great for our department working and moving forward. And I hope that you could gain something from that as well. Even if it's not questions about this research, just any comments on your experiences with that moment in time that we all remember. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Anderson. That was a very insightful, very interesting presentation. And as always, with all of our presenters, so much that you said really resonated with me on a personal level, as well as I'm sure with all of our attendees. I know many students who've also proceeded to drop out because they were struggling too much with adapting to this flipped learning environment. And I think even with some of the different experiences that they've had and potentially increased interaction, online, that still wasn't enough for some of them. So it's interesting to see, again, the advantages and the disadvantages that come with e-learning and teaching as well. So I don't want to take up too much more time speaking about this, but I'd like to open the floor to some of our attendees who asked some very interesting questions. So I'm thinking that I can just select a question for each presenter first, and then, if there's time, we can proceed to answer the rest. So one of the first questions that was asked to Ms. Rashita was someone who said, "Thanks so much for this presentation, Rashita. This is really thought-provoking and might work very well in classrooms where everyone has access to laptops, etc. But what strategies and practices would you recommend for learning environments of disadvantaged students who might only have a phone or radio?" What are your thoughts on this?
All right. Thank you, Janaan. In fact, I'll take both those questions together in one shot. So first and foremost, this framework was for selecting e-learning tools and not really the learning strategies, teaching and learning strategies. But to answer that question, a very thought-provoking question, I would suggest using more of asynchronous resources, asynchronous tools, and if it is using phone or radio, using the mode of audio and video, tools would be the best way, not just for the lecturer to give a lecture to the student, but even feedback can be recorded and sent back to the faculty. So in fact, we have with us here Dr. Don England and Philip Anderson from Education Department, my colleagues, and they both, let me tell you, that have been experimenting over last 20 weeks with developing a set of asynchronous resources, which I think is ideal for disadvantaged students. And to question number 2, if you are doing distance learning, creating the right kind of asynchronous resources and tools would be a solution. To also take the question on the metaphor, just to answer that, yes, I think that was pretty risky on me to say throwing darts. Well, my presumption was for the first time, if you're moving to using an e-learning tool, it would just be a random pick, maybe what I saw something Philip doing today, and I might just try to experiment it in my class. But what works for Phil may not work for me. And that's why I say that using the SAMR framework, using cataloging, reflecting will help you to move up the continuum and find out what works best for you. But to conclude, for distance learning, I suggest that you have to use a lot of feedback tools. You have to use e-learning tools, which will give you metrics, performance metrics, which shows how well the student has performed, has the student answered well, so on and so forth, which helps you to evaluate whether the tool works or not. If Dr. Dawn could want to add something on asynchronous resources, I would like her to share a few words.
Dr. Dawn, you're muted.
Thank you. I was impressed with that thought because that hadn't occurred to me, but it makes a lot of sense. I think that there's a lot about the digital divide that needs to be explored. At our university, students had the resources to use, and so we would give, even if it was just with a cell phone, we would happily have them join with a cell phone. But there's a lot to the digital divide that is excluding students who don't have even those resources. And we don't have the answers to that, but I'm sure we could have a vibrant discussion about it.
Yeah, I remember last year when we locked down, we had one student who was stranded in Zambia, and it took her a day to download a PDF. And what can you do with that? It's difficult. You can say, oh, it's all online, you don't have to join live, but if that's happening, then it'll be interesting to gain any kind of insight into how to deal with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, there's so many problems associated with technology, and there's so much potential. And I think what all of our presenters have also indicated, but also Ms. Rashita just now, is that we really need to constantly take the feedback that we're receiving from our teachers, from our colleagues as educators, as well as from our students, and continuously improve the educational systems that we have and the tools and the programs that we're using. Because I mean, we definitely are, of course, using online tools and learning so much more now than before. So even if it feels like we've been doing this forever, we've only been doing this very intensively for the past year and a half or so. So that's really great. I'd just like to also move on to ask Dr. Olga a few questions. Dr. Samsonova, Dr. Olga, sorry, whatever you're more comfortable with. Someone said, exciting presentation, Olga. Sounds like HCT does a great job regarding distance learning. However, was there any feedback from your students on where and what to improve? With what aspects are students struggling the most? That would be really interesting for educators, I think. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, like I said, there was some of the students who were struggling with lack of meeting with friends, talking to the teacher, and a lack of hands-on activities. However, some of the students prefer to have this type of learning. And there is no way to say it's absolutely no for all of us to have distance learning. From my point of view, even talking about Rashita educational tool, I love Nearpod. Nearpod can be used even on the phone. Lots of my students were were following my lesson on the phone, being in the mall or being in the hospital, because Nearpod gives you the tool that gives you an opportunity to talk, to listen, to answer the question, and the instructor can even do assessment every single minute if you want to. as well as track students' attendance and track student participation. I think there's plenty of research needs to be done in order to improve and understand the useful of all the online resources. And going back to the question, there's a lot of concern as well. Like I said, some of the students were struggling with no connectivity with their friends. Some of the students were struggling working in groups during online learning. Some of the students were struggling with the grade, they were afraid. But I want to say there are some limitations that I didn't notice that, again, there was only a small sample, 18 students. And there are my bias because I was the one who was interpreting the results of my students. And those students were about 7 students, they almost done with education. If you're going to talk about my bus 1, bus 2 students who just walk into the college, I think I would find more disadvantages. I would find more negative responses from the students.
Great, thank you. Yes, definitely agreed. I think a lot of students that are in their final year of studies are just willing to push through because they've come so far already. So it's really this process of, I don't really enjoy what's going on right now, but at the same time, I've come too far, so I cannot just drop everything right now and let go of my degree. And that was also certainly the case for me as well when I was wrapping up my degree. I was not interested in necessarily stopping my education before I graduated. So definitely agree with that. And what do you think also of the next question that you were asked? Do you think that a blended learning approach would be more effective in the post-pandemic era, or is this something that would also need to be negotiated based on future studies?
Yes, I also fan of blended learning. I'm the one who's doing research in blended learning, and my last work was on looking for literature review on blended learning, specifically in United Arab Emirates, and I found lots of interesting outcomes that UAE, Middle East students, they are different, especially gender different. Like we are teaching specifically boys or girls, and their difference and their perceptions. And based on my study findings from the literature review from my research, yes, for some of the students who were struggling of lack of hands-on activities, the blended learning approach would be more useful. For some of the students who need to come and talk to the teacher, for the student who wants to come to the college and work with the group of the colleagues and use hands-on activity. Like I want to underline, though my students are educational students. So everything I've been using in my teaching through distance learning, they will use or being used in their teaching. Like I want to remind everybody, our teaching, our practice, educational practice happen online. My student went to public schools online, and they've been struggling as well as we struggle, and they've been used all the resources or the strategies or the approaches with their practices as well. And I want to underline, we are helping our students to be successful in the future. So teaching them, we support the future as well. And again, going back to the question, blended learning approach would be more helpful, of course, in terms of lots of hands-on activities for some of the students who need it.
Of course. Thank you. I think we have the time just to barely take on one last question for Mr. Philip.
Yeah, I've just made a massive mistake. I was just because I saw the time as well. I tried to type the answer to the anonymous one, and I typed in Melissa's answer by mistake. I think it's getting late in the day.
Okay.
But I've answered. So anonymous attendee.
Yeah.
I've answered that one. With Melissa, I'll be as quick as possible.
Yes,
so
please.
Yeah, so peer interaction. We've been trying to do lots more collaborative activities. We're very fortunate to have breakout rooms and those kinds of things. And I think that facilitating those kinds of activities, even just like a 5-minute think, pair, share, put everyone in pairs, it forces people to interact. And those who've got a little bit too comfortable with turning their microphone off and being passive, it actually gets them into that. And and when you do force them into it, they do actually quite enjoy it in the end. So in short, it's really just trying to make them collaborate, and then outside just do events like film club. We do virtual tours of schools and those kinds of things, and they're really popular as well.
I agree. Simulation is key in this virtual world of learning and education. So we've come to the end of our panel session. Thank you all so much for joining us. This was an incredible honor for me, and I really enjoyed all of your presentations. And just keep an eye out on our Twitter. We're planning on posting a few pictures as well of our panel presentation. So.
السلام عليكم جميعاً. يسعدنا الوصول إلى نهاية المؤتمر وأتمنى أن نكون كلنا سعيدين. I will say just then through the closing remarks by now. Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at this late hour for the closing remarks to the 9th biannual Gulf Comparative Education Society Conference on Rethinking Educational Reform and the GCC Reflecting on the Past to Inform the Future. Remind everyone to switch in the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen, which looks like a small globe in order to hear the Arabic translation. أذكر الجميع باستخدام أو باختيار أيقونة الترجمة في أسفل الشاشة والذي يشبه سماعة الترجمة لسماع الترجمة العربية. I'm Dr. Ahoud Al-Asfour, the president of the GCES and assistant professor at the College of Basic Education and the Public Authority for Applied Education and Training in Kuwait. Over the past year and a half, we have been trying to organize this conference, which was originally scheduled to be held in April in 2020 in Kuwait. However, following the outbreak of COVID-19, the conference was postponed, and ultimately it was decided that it would be best to hold this conference virtually in March 2021. This, of course, is in light of the continued influence of the pandemic on our daily lives and researchers in the field of education. As such, I hope that the discussions and issues that have been brought to light during this conference will positively influence the trajectory of educational development in the GCC. Over the past 3 days, we have tackled 3 key themes in relation to thinking and in relation to rethinking educational reform. On the first day of the conference, we covered the theme bridging past and future perspectives, while emphasizing the necessity of examining past developments and futuristic assessments of educational performance. We further discussed the need to address traditional indicators and measures of student performance and how leadership in educational institutions need to change and adapt to technological advancements within this era. On the second day of this conference, we discussed the potential for development and education exchange. Our discussions revolved around the role of the state in stimulating change within our education systems. We further addressed lessons that can be learned from other states in the global north, ranging from Finland to the UK and the US, and how these can be modified and applied in the Gulf. Lastly, today, we have discussed how we can move forward by rethinking educational reform in the present, especially considering the influence of COVID-19 on education systems. The impact of the pandemic on education cannot overemphasized, as it is undeniable that the coronavirus outbreak has forever changed the educational landscape in the Gulf as well as worldwide. For those of who were not with us on March 21st and 22nd, I would just like to remind everyone last time that following the conclusion of the GCES conference, all presenters are welcome to submit their research papers to the Gulf Education and Social Policy Review, also known as GESPR. The Al-Qasimi Foundation launched Gulf Education and Social Policy Review GESPR in 2019 as part of its ongoing commitment to open access knowledge sharing and to support scholarship on education and social policy issues in the Gulf region. A peer-reviewed bilingual academic journal, GESPR is dedicated to providing education and social policy research and insights on the Gulf region to a readership that includes regional and international scholars practitioners, organizations, and policymakers to inform education and development agendas in the Gulf and beyond. All submissions are initially reviewed by editorial board members, and those endorsed for potential publications are sent for peer review. GESPER uses a double-blind review process, which means that identities of both reviewers and authors remain anonymous. The reviewers for both manuscripts are contacted according to their areas of expertise. As my colleague Max indicated, not all papers are guaranteed to be published, as each submission is subject to be a double-blind review process. However, everyone is more than welcome to submit their work in the coming weeks or months, and the staff at the Al-Qasimi Foundation will update you about the status of your submission in due time. The organization of this conference would not have been possible without the support and active engagement of multiple actors, institutions, and organizations. Firstly, I would like to thank the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Science, KFAS, and the Sheikh Saud bin Sagir Al-Qasimi Foundation for Policy Research for their organizational support and sponsorship. The constant dedication and support of the Al-Qasimi Foundation has been crucial in the organization of past events and continues to play a significant role in shaping educational policy in the UAE and the Greater Arab Gulf region. We would also like to thank our colleagues at Merit Management and Media Consultancy based in Kuwait. A special thanks goes to Ms. Amani from behind the scene and Engineer Ali. I would also like to extend my thanks to the individual actors involved in the organization of the conference at Al-Qasimi Foundation, especially Dr. Natasha Ridge, Executive Director, Marvin Erfer, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Research Department, David Dingos, Research Associate. He's feeling better now. Max Eckert, Research Assistant and Lead of the GCES Secretariat. Janaan Farhat, co-organizer and member of the GCES Secretariat at the Al-Qasimi Foundation. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to all our keynote speakers, including Dr. Susan Robertson, Professor of Sociology of Education at the University of Cambridge, Dr. Ahmed Al-Shahi, Research Fellow at St. Anthony's College in Oxford University, Dr. Fatma Al-Hashim, Assistant Professor in Curriculum and Instruction at the Gulf University for Science and Technology, Dr. Diego Santore, Senior Lecturer at King's College in London. A special thank also goes due to Dr. Salwa Al-Jassar, our featured speaker from Kuwait University, and Dr. Nadre Asilolamba, a professor at Cornell University and the current president of the World Council of Comparative Education Societies. We would also like to sincerely thank Eleanor Burton and Layan Dabt of ENV in Kuwait for hosting an interesting and engaging workshop on collective impact at the start of the conference. Moreover, a special thank you is due to our moderators who did an excellent job in chairing the sessions and stimulating debates in their respective panels. This includes Dr. Natasha Ridge, Executive Director at the Al-Qasimi Foundation, Dr. Abdullah Al-Ajmi, Associate Professor at the Arab Open University and the former President of the GCES, Dr. Aisha Al-Harthi, Associate Professor at Sultan Qaboos University, Dr. Asra Al-Isa, Associate Professor at Kuwait University, Dr. Salwa Al-Jassar, former member of the Kuwaiti Parliament and Associate Professor at Kuwait University, Marvin Erfer, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Research Department at the Al-Qasimi Foundation, Dr. Khalaf Al-Abri, Assistant Professor at Sultan Qaboos University and candidate for Vice Presidential Elections for GCES, Dr. Uhud Lebloushi, a non-resident fellow at Gulf International Forum and independent legal consultant, Dr. Fatma Al-Hashim, Assistant Professor at the Gulf University for Science and Technology, Dr. Naif Al-Sulaimi, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Education in Al-Qura University, and Janaan Farhat, a member of the GCES Secretariat at the Al-Qasimi Foundation, and alumna of Leiden University. Last but not least, this event would not have been possible without the research efforts and dedication of the scholars, researchers, education specialists, and practitioners who submitted their work to the GCES Secretariat and presented live during the conference. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge in this public symposium and helping us contribute to the continued nourishment of educational systems in the Gulf. Without you and our prospective members of the Gulf Comparative Education Society and the attendees of this conference, we would not have been here today. As I come to a close to my speech, I would like to announce the winner of the vice presidential elections based on the votes that we have received. First, I would like to take this opportunity to thank both candidates for their willingness and readiness to invest their time, effort, and expertise in carrying responsibilities of this role in representing the GCES. I'm glad to announce the new president of GCES with only 10% difference is Dr. Khalaf Al-Abri, Assistant Professor at Sultan Qaboos University. Congratulations, Dr. Khalaf. I will proceed to yield the floor to Dr. Khalaf and allow him to give a few words. Thank you. تفضل دكتور خلف. مبروك.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جميعا. شكرا دكتور عهود. الله يبارك فيك ونسأل الله التوفيق والإخلاص. I think I would shift to English, Dr. Ahud, and there would be a translation. I'm not prepared for the speech, but I would just try to say thank you very much first for organizing this conference in that professional way. Really, I heard a lot. I saw in Twitter a lot of tweets about the success of this conference. Thank you very much and congratulations for you, Dr. Ahud, the GCES Secretariat, the media and everyone participating in the organization of this conference. Also, I would thank the members who attended and also all who attended this conference and supported the conference from the first day. With regards to taking this position, I mean, I had that in personal interest and also regional, benefit to push for more work and efforts in terms of educational research. I would thank the members for their trust, and I would say I would try my best and promise to do my best in terms of carrying the efforts and also the activities done by the society. To tell you the truth, I've been with the society for a while now, and since I finished my PhD in 2016, I tried to immerse myself in the activities and the conferences done by the society. There has been for a decade now, since 2008, I think, a lot of efforts and activities, and especially this conference that bring all specialized, would not say only the scholars from the region, but scholars who are interested in studying the education in the region. So the society has been doing a great job in terms of that, and I'm really looking forward to carry those efforts and put my hands with Dr. Ahud and the team in the society in order to bring more activities and also more collaborations with different bodies, organizations in the region and around the globe. Really, I'm thinking of some actions I would just and some plans and strategy for the society for the next 3 years at least, and I would work closely with the team and In fact, you know, maybe I have some ideas, but you don't know the challenges and the issues. And hopefully we will try our best with the team to do something and to bring hopefully some improvements and change and build on the achievements of the previous teams who have been carrying this job team after team. A message to the all members. I mean, we'd love also to hear from them about, you know, the next activities or the coming activities they would like to see. I think the email, the Twitter account is available and we can hear from them, and we will try always to communicate and also to share our ideas with the members. Thank you very much, and wish me all the best. I think I would end my speech here. Thank you very much for your trust. I promise to do my best to work and to improve. I mean, to work on also improving the work of the society. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahoud.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalaf, and welcome as always. You are a member, you were a member at the society, and looking forward for our next event. Should it be another conference or an event in between, we don't know.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.